Hello again. This is Phil Amerson with the To Be and Do podcast, where being and doing are seen as equally important, and they reinforce the gifts that God has out there for us. And so we have been really fortunate to visit with Tim Soerens, executive director of the Parish Collective. We're going to put the website that you can check more about their work. And Tim's, I first knew of his writing in the book, The New Parish. I should have asked you more about that. I love the story about waiting at the bus stop for people to get off the bus. And, that was terrific as an example of evangelism. Um, but I also know you've got a new book, Everywhere You Look. And why don't you tell us a bit about what the Parish Collective is up to, Tim, and maybe some ways people can participate in the future?
Sure. Well, the Parish Collective has a mission to connect people to be and become the church in the neighborhood. We really feel like our task is to try and reimagine and honestly, by God's grace, try and help to reorganize the church around relationships that are pursuing God's shalom. So that's kind of a mouthful, but that we really feel like the body of Christ in many ways is still the hope of the world. And that that doesn't necessarily mean that we just get bigger and bigger churches. It means the whole point is to see flourishing in our neighborhoods, in, with, and across all of our neighborhoods. And so what we do is essentially three things. We tell stories of where God is active, which we know is everywhere, but we create resources and stories which people can go to on the website. And just the hope there is to, whether they're everyday Christians or pastors or even denominational leaders, to see like I am not alone in my desire to see the church thrive and grow and like be a meaningful neighbor in what can feel like a pretty polarizing moment right now. And then we also do all kinds of convenings. So we do learning communities, usually in cities. We have a conference that based on when this comes out is May 1st and 2nd in 2026 in Chicago, and that's a big flagship gathering that brings together all kinds of incredible people. We've had regional conferences as well, and are increasingly thinking that it might be a profound gift to offer environments of like pastoral peer meetups, again at the city level. And then finally, um, we do increasingly work with denominations and seminaries and philanthropies, larger systems who are asking, in some ways, yet a different question, which is how are we creating the systems and structures for flourishing neighborhoods through the life of the church? And so that can look like ongoing, essentially, conversations, consultations, environments that we're trying to create. But at, at its base, if you're listening and you're like, yeah, I want to be and become a part of the church in my neighborhood, or my faith matters to me a lot, but I'm kind of confused about the church right now. I think read some of these stories, see what some of our friends are writing about or creating. I think it might give you hope and some fun adjacent ideas.
Yeah. Well, I
It's my co-author Paul Sparks's story. He, as they were trying to figure out how to not just create environments, but like show that it was possible to relationally be the church in the neighborhood. He at one point he would essentially like hide in some bushes nearby a local coffee shop that lots of people that were part of the congregation would often go to. And he would wait. He would bring a book and he would wait until he saw two people who wouldn't normally see each other. And then he would jump out of the bush and then say, "Hey, look, we're being the church together. Look, it's like Tuesday morning, and here we are." And he's kind of a genius
yeah.
in that regard. But yeah, I mean, it goes to something that we think about all the time, which is, if obviously none of us have the power to do this, but if you could just like a DVD, or like if you're streaming something, you press pause, it all stops. I sometimes wonder about that as it relates to everyday followers of Jesus in neighborhoods and how if we could just pause the movie for a second and then shine a light on every follower of Jesus whose faith mattered to them, who wanted to be about the renewal of the neighborhood, and yet don't know one another at all. I think that's actually one of the great challenges that we face that we're not always talking about. One of the we just had Ash Wednesday. That's one of the reasons I love that holiday is our um, liturgical day is you can kind of get a sense that there actually are more followers of Jesus than usually you think. It's like the only way. It's the only day of the year that we kind of like make a visible mark. And um, I've often thought, oh yeah, how do we? I don't think that we should probably all wear T-shirts or collars or weird things, but I do wish that there was a way that we could be a little bit more confident, public, curious about our common faith, and then what our common faith brings up in our everyday lives.
Yeah. I am gonna go somewhere that I didn't intend to go, but it's really just to thank you, and thank you for being in Chicago and doing your work. I'm enough older than you. You maybe never knew about SCOOP, the Seminary Consortium for Urban Pastoral Education. A number of us taught there, and it actually came out of the evangelical group in Chicago. Good friends, Bud Ipema and Bill Leslie, and Ray Bakke. And the great story, and it's why I love the coffee shop bus stop story, is Tony Van Zanten was a pastor down near where you are now at an RCA church, and he used to go to the train station, to the subway station, and do exactly the same thing. He would wait and connect up people there. And Tony was a great pastor. His legacy continues to this day. So thank you. It makes me Scoop is no longer functioning, but I don't have to worry. The Parish Collective is now alive and well.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, Phil. There are so many incredible ministries and stories in the city of Chicago. It's also one of the largest cities that is very distinctly a city of neighborhoods. And so
Yes.
I love it here so much. I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you choose to be there, or what brought you from the West Coast to the Midwest, to the
Well,
third coast, as some of us
the
say?
third coast. Yes, that's right. Well, I grew up in Wisconsin and then lived for 20 years in Seattle. And I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, and I would say that most people who grow up in small towns in the Midwest either really love Chicago or they really, really don't. I always really did. So the reason that we moved back, the primary reason is that my parents are getting older and needed help, and I was
Right.
just too far away to try and help care for, especially my dad. And also, it was one of those. It was a difficult discernment, more for me actually than my wife. But um, yeah, we moved here about 2.5 years ago, and yeah, overall, it's been wonderful. And ironically, even though all of my work is about neighborhoods and place, because it's kind of grown national, uh, I can I can work with our team, which is also national anywhere. So,
That's terrific. That's terrific. So do I dare ask, White Sox or Cubs?
oh, you can absolutely ask. Cubs. I Here's a little fun fact. I'm pretty sure, Phil, even though I lived in Seattle for 20 years, that there has never been a year since I was about 16, I'm 46, that I have not been to Wrigley Field. I'm a very faithful Cubs fan.
Yeah.
And, uh, one of the great, great joys of my life is I can ride my bike to Wrigley Field from where I live, which is just the best. The cathedral of baseball. We could talk about that's a whole other
Absolutely.
podcast.
Absolutely. You've just won my heart. I've been a Cubs fan for a long
Well,
time.
we need to go Wrigley together, I think this
Yeah.
season, and they're looking good.
Well, as we used to say before 2016, any team can have a bad century.
Oh, yeah. I have an uncle in Wisconsin who lives just outside Milwaukee. He used to take this is I credit him. He would take me when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old. I think this still happens where the Cubs and the White Sox, like, once or twice a year, they'll play on the same day, the Cubs in the day and
Yeah.
White Sox at night. And that was like you put a 9-year-old in the bleachers, and if they love it, oh my goodness. Then we'd drive down Lakeshore Drive and go to the old Comiskey, um, sometimes get dinner in Chinatown. I was just completely enraptured. So,
Yeah.
I love baseball.
That's great. That's great. Well, Chicago is a city of neighborhoods, and it's also a city of parishes in terms of the Catholic community. I mean,
Yes.
when I've been in and out, and around and lived in Chicago several times, and I can still remember if you asked someone where they were from and they were Catholic, they would say St. Rita's or Holy Family, or uh, in many of those parishes, there was still that kind of identity. Um, Talk a bit about that and the identity of neighborhoods and parish, and how we may be rediscovering the importance of that.
Absolutely. Well, from a church perspective, one of the many reasons that I am so passionate about neighborhoods is that it allows us to ask the questions not only of what God is doing, but in a very particular place with very particular people and stories and histories and structures. And so we can have a very particular imagination. And when congregations are asking that question, that is inherently collaborative. It is almost never competitive to ask what does the dream of God look like in, with, and for this place. I mean, you want more people, more friends, more assets, more characters when you're asking that question, which is different essentially than how do we get people to come to our church on Sunday? That is honestly, if we're real honest, that is a competitive question. It's like who's who's winning market share on Sunday morning. And so from a church perspective, I think the neighborhood provides such a powerful platform of collaboration in you could say, the game we're supposed to be playing, or the one that matters the most. I also think that the neighborhood matters so much because if you look across almost every sector, I'd say the majority of sectors, whether that be economics, politics, education, health, things like food and farming, even things like policing, there are really hopeful movements within each of those sectors who are saying we need to get back to a more local, relational, kind of neighborhood way of life. That's one of the ways that we heal and renew even our sector, that the kind of hegemonic, globalizing forces have gotten out of hand. And what's really interesting about that, Phil, is there is, to my understanding, no other institution or organism quite like the church whose mission and goal is the integration, the affirmation, to be the connective tissue amongst all of them. So we're not just the quote unquote religious people. We're the people that are pursuing the repair, the renewal, the reimagination of maximum flourishing because we believe that's what God is doing. And so the neighborhood then becomes the most powerful place where you could say it's like a human scale environment where we can try and practice our faith together. And I just
Yeah.
think I honestly think that that possibility is upstream of almost everything that ails us. We spend all of our time focused on global and national politics, and understandably, things are crazy. Doesn't matter your that's not a partisan statement, by the way, it's just crazy. But we all know, like, upstream of politics is economics and money. Upstream of money is culture. Upstream of culture, I would argue, is a set of values. It's the stories that we believe. It's religion, I would argue. Like, we human beings are religious, whether you're of a particular religious tradition or not. We bet on stories that give us meaning, and none of us really know. That's that's my take anyway. And so to be able to practice a coherent faith in an actual place, I think is one of the most powerful, subversive things that we can possibly do together, especially if you're concerned about the current state of things.
Wow, powerful summary. We need to write that and put it in, brochures and pass it out in the neighborhood. That's
I think, yeah,
terrific.
we need to go down to the subway and just pass it out. I need to recruit some people.
You know, one of the things that strikes me is social scientists for a long time have talked about the strength of weak relationships. Then some other researchers at Michigan State and other places built on that and talked about it's better maybe to call those bridging relationships. It seems to me that that's part of the power of the neighborhood and the story is that there is that person you see at the store, and the first 20 times you may not say hello, but you begin to know who's your neighbor and the practices that emerge, at least in my experience, and it oftentimes because I'm not as extroverted as my spouse, she generally knows their name by the second time, uh, takes me 4 or 5 times, but it's that building of cohesive tissue, connective tissue, that's part of it, to use the language that I find you using that's so helpful, to see what God is about, what God is doing here already.
Yeah, and Phil, that is really important at the neighborhood level. It's also profoundly important between neighborhoods. The great urbanist Jane Jacobs essentially said that great cities are simply a federation of great neighborhoods, and you can extrapolate that out between cities as well. And so, yeah, the weak links are the kind of the bridging relationships is really, really powerful. And the leadership that's required to cultivate weak links and the environments that need to be created, I also don't think we give enough time and attention to. We literally do need some common ground, I think, to begin with a kind of a common story or a frame. But once that's there, I think the literal, sky's the limit as far as possibilities, especially if there's a sense that neighborhoods themselves are interdependent, which I think most people would agree with, and then cities are as well. One of my uh, favorite books of the last couple of years is a book called When Mayors Rule the World by Benjamin
Yeah.
Barber.
Uh,
And it makes this case quite powerfully that nation states, again, we put a lot of attention into nation states, and for some good reason, but his perspective is that we have eclipsed our potential to truly function in interdependent ways. That if you look at whether it be climate change or any kind of trafficking, human trafficking, gun trafficking, drug trafficking, anything that's truly interdependent, a problem, nations coming together at a big long table is increasingly less likely to happen.
yeah,
But if you contrast that with mayors, and not just the United States, around the world, they arguably have the highest amount of, you could say, political power that's most accountable to real people and voters in quote unquote Western democracies. And so I think that's a powerful, again, platform for our theological, missiological imagination, not necessarily to just get whoever we want elected, but to say, no, 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 we can affect change through our relationships, particularly if we're focused on a holistic flourishing from neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city.
right. Okay, so I'm gonna take a risk. I'm gonna tee one up for you, and we'll see. Maybe I'm way off base, but there was a movie, several years ago, Isaac Stern Goes to China. The great violinist Isaac Stern goes to China, and he listens to these Chinese musicians who are technically extraordinary. And Stern says they have all the techniques down. But then he says, but is the instrument made for the music or the music made for the instrument? And whether it's the mayor or the pastor or the denominational leader, I I think part of our challenge has been that we've somehow thought the instrument was made to play without knowing the music
Yes.
or without, yes, appreciating that the instrument is just there for the music. What are you what does that elicit from you? That Phil is just a weird guy or
No. Well, I'm thinking I haven't seen that movie, but when you described it, I when you talk about, like, the technical proficiency, it feels to me at one point kind of impressive, like, from a technical way, but what most of us love the most about music and the arts in general is that it helps us to feel. It like, reminds us what does it mean to be human, and that's one of the big questions of our day right now.
yeah,
What does it mean not just to be human, but to be and become, to do and be more whole, more healthy people? And I can't fathom doing that outside of some sense of common mission or purpose. I can't think of how we could do that as isolated individuals. And I also can't think of how we could do that if we don't have a path where we can continually become, to grow and mature and look at blind spots and tell the truth and literally grow up. Um, you could say those are Christian ideas like mission and formation relationship, and I would say they are, but at a deeper level, they're just human. And so, yeah, where I take that is, w- what is Jesus all about? He's wants us to become more and more truly human. Kind of looks at like C.S. Lewis talked about. He looks at our small desires and says, "There's
very
joy."
nice, very nice. It takes me back to, the beginning of our first conversation to John McKnight.
Yeah.
And many, years ago, I've gotta be careful how I tell this story. I deliberately took a leader of an educational institution to lunch with John,
Mm.
and this educational leader, quite, um, appropriately, I think, bragged on all the leadership programs they had at that school, and the leadership for this and leadership for that, and John was typical John, very polite and listened, and as we were leaving, John said to this person, "You know, leadership is good, but you might wanna think a little bit about connectorship."
Yeah. Wow.
And and for me, that's the difference between having high technical skills or leadership training, but have you missed the music?
Yes.
As you say, the humanity, the humanness.
Phil, that reminds me of another mutual friend who was, of course, a very dear friend of John's as well, Peter Block.
Oh,
He has this short 3 words, which I think are revolutionary, which is that leadership is convening. That's what it is. And that can turn the world upside down if that's taken seriously. We don't typically that creates all kinds of metaphors and imaginations and practices and postures if that is our primary, you could say, imagination for what leadership is. But yeah, Peter and John have taught and modeled that really beautifully.
yeah. Well, Tim, we've gotta do this again. This has been fun.
I would love
Uh,
to.
and thank you so much for your time and for reminding us of Peter Block, and leadership is convening. This is Phil Amerson and Tim Soerens, saying so long for
Everybody,
the To Be and Do podcast. God bless.
God bless you.